There were quite a lot of students in the private school of Yggdrasil, and they were all friendly with each other. One tall guy approached his friend on the road. Her name was Ella. He told her to just look back because something unusual was happening there. Eli was certainly interested in what was happening there. And as soon as she turned back, she was incredibly surprised because a person appeared right in front of them that they definitely did not expect to see soon. On the territory of the academy came a rather attractive tall girl. She had silver hair and she was really amazing. As soon as everyone around saw her, they immediately recognized her because it was the famous lady Aslanya Levenshut. As soon as the guys saw her, they immediately got upset because this particular girl was a member of a special student council called Heaven. Everyone who was present at that moment in the backyard of the academy could not take their eyes off the girl. Even the ladies were delighted by her appearance. Aslanya was not only incredibly beautiful, but she also came from a rich duke's family. So many people considered her really ideal. However, that suddenly one fair-haired guy was outraged. He said that he actually heard completely different rumors about this girl, so he completely disagreed with all the admiring exclamations. Coming closer, he said that he had heard somewhere that this lady is very quarrelsome. She is greedy and arrogant about everything. Aslanya herself, as soon as she heard this, was very surprised. Of course, these words hurt the girl. After all, they were not true at all. She quickly closed the distance between her and the man and was about to hit him when suddenly she heard that he continued to spread dirty rumors about her. This guy said that even many people say that she is very fat like a pig. The girl could not believe that they really could say that about her. However, at that moment, Askania already swung at this guy in order to resist him. But this did not happen because she opened her eyes and realized that it was just a dream. The girl was not an adult at all and did not study at the academy. She was still a very small child, and in fact, she really looked rather chubby, but incredibly cute. In fact, Askia Levenshut was one of the eldest daughters of Duke Tolstoy, and a very harmful girl. Everyone around knew that. Also, this person was the main villain in the game called Fantasy Adventurer. In fact, one beautiful lady who was suffering from a very serious disease spent her life playing this game every day, and eventually she moved to the dating simulator. In this game, it was possible not only to meet, but also to develop your hero and build fortresses that were not in other games. In general, this game had many different endings, which are incredibly difficult for the player to reach. But this was the girl's favorite game because this way she could forget about the difficult world around her. She really had to try very hard to see all the endings of this game, but in the end she was able to achieve this. The reason why this game was considered difficult was that if you carelessly treat the romantic line or the development of the character, it is absolutely impossible to get to the end. And the girl herself quite often simply died before even reaching the middle of the story. The main setting of the game was a private school for geniuses, which was called Yggdrasil. Every semester, exams were held in that place. In case of failure, it was necessary to take them again for additional exams. If the student couldn't do this in the end, he was simply expelled from school. Moreover, if he only went on a date, his character ratings began to deteriorate. Therefore, the number of characters for dating was very limited. And if the sympathy indicators fell, the inscription about the 10th ending of this game appeared. And the ending, it was called the beginning of poverty. It was very common in that game because many people could not combine everything. But at the same time, if attention is paid only to the growth of the character, it is impossible to accumulate points for sympathy, and the 23rd ending was happening. This ending was called the ability to serve. And she was really not the only one who was happy, but after that, there was the 64th ending, which was called loneliness. And then the game ended much earlier than the user had time to reach the strategy of the storyline of the game. For this reason, the girl who moved into Askania's body was a regular player who kept a balance between dating and character growth. After the girl got into this world, she began to learn information and really understood what was inside this game. This was a private school, and it existed in reality. And the name of the kingdom and the names of the characters completely coincided with the game. But all the same, the girl was troubled by one question she did not understand. For what reason, she inhabited the body of one of the bosses of this game. In fact, Askania was one of the negative characters of this game, and they differed from other dating simulators. The girl knew very well that there was magic in the world of this game, so the thieves behaved in a completely different way. They did not hide textbooks and did not push them down the stairs. Most of their actions were a real threat to the lives of others. Once, one of the thieves put a water bottle on the body of one of the students and even set her on fire. While the main characters were asleep, they could strangle them with the help of magic, or be kidnapped, tied up, and burned alive. There were many different bad endings in which the thieves won, and if the main player does not grow his character properly, he could die right during the main event. This was the peculiarity of the villains of the fantasy game. The attraction among them were also weak villains who simply disappeared in the middle of the game because they had no meaning. There were also so-called bosses who appeared at the very end and asked to kill the main characters in order to take over that world. Among such bosses, there were 3 people. The first was a fair-haired charming man. His name was Rudin. He was the prince of the world. The second such was the messenger of darkness. It was Yuri. He had dark hair and incredibly beautiful black eyes. And finally, there was a steel empress, Ascania, into whom the girl moved. She had a height of 170 centimeters. However, her weight is the same as her height. About the posts, the ratio of height and weight were 1-to-1. Also, when the girl moved inside this body, she learned that there was also a list of diseases. This list included high blood pressure, moderate diabetes, hyperlipidemia, herniated intervertebral disc and cervical disc, and many other diseases. There were endings with suffocation during sleep, cardiac arrest due to arrhythmia. All this was subject to Ascania, so surviving in her body was another adventure. Also, the girl could have an ischemic stroke due to diabetes. All these diseases arose as a result of the lady's obesity. And because of this, the girl who moved into her body was even more difficult because throughout her previous life she lived in a hospital and eventually died. Therefore, Ascania set herself a goal as soon as she moved and found out all the details about the fact that she definitely will not be able to die even in her new life. She definitely wanted to change her body in order to remove the list of all the diseases that she had because of severe obesity. She was going to radically change her life, lose weight, and finally become healthy. And when the guests brought the usual portion of various sweet desserts for breakfast, the girl firmly refused them. The maid finally heard this and was amazed. She thought that perhaps this was not enough for the girl and was going to bring more. But Ascania, being still a small child, answered that from this day on she was not going to eat morning snacks. Therefore, it was better not to bring her anything else. The girl then proudly raised her head and announced to her maid that from this moment on she was going on a diet, and of course the servant heard it. She was just horrified. The girl definitely did not expect to hear such a thing. She looked at Ascania with surprise and wondered if she was really going to do it. The maid said that this is not possible. Maybe you want to fire us all under the pretext of a diet. She really started to worry about her job. While Ascania went for a morning jog in order to have some physical activity in her day, the maids talked discussing this whole situation. One of the maids who worked in the laundry room said that she would probably pretend to be losing weight for a few days. Then she would see that she hadn't lost weight, and they would fire everyone, including even the cooks, although they would not be guilty of anything. Ascania, who was lying in the meantime, was very surprised because she did not expect that the little girl who should have been full of energy turned out to be weaker than the girl who spent her whole life in the hospital. She stopped, ran a few meters and tried to bring her breathing back to normal, and Scania seriously thought about the fact that she should change the type of training, because at such a pace she definitely will not last long. But suddenly the girl heard footsteps behind her, and after that, the voices of 2 adults. As soon as she turned back, she saw her mother and father. Her mother approached Ascania and asked her why she had this sudden desire to go on a diet and do sports. The father also ran up to her and said that she was not fat at all. On the contrary, she needed to gain weight. The girl's mother started to hug her and said that you have lost so much weight, so I don't understand why you started doing all these diets and sports. The woman began to cry and said that the girl had eaten almost nothing in the morning. She could not watch her child starve because of this. Her heart literally broke. Of course, Ascania was very surprised when she heard about it because she herself knew that she was obese. However, her parents did not notice this at all. Therefore, she turned to them and said that no matter what we say, she will definitely lose weight, and if they stop her, she will no longer sit at the same table with them. As soon as the man and woman heard this, they were incredibly amazed. They could not even answer their daughter for this. Mother then did not hold back her tears again. She burst into tears and asked the girls how she could say such a thing to them. The father was not bowed down at that moment. He assumed that Ascania was serious, so he understood that it would be impossible to convince her at that moment. But he continued to worry about her all the same because he thought that she might have some kind of exhaustion or that she might get sick because of her strong desire. After the run, Ascania went to breakfast. She asked them to prepare a diet salad and have breakfast. She decided to join her parents. When she had already started to eat, her parents told her some unusual news. Her father said that Marky Appleton had a son her age. He had few friends, so he asked Ascania to make friends with him so that everyone around him would be calmer. The girl at that moment seriously thought about this proposal. In fact, let's go to the reincarnation. She lived in the hospital all the time. That's why she had absolutely no friends even in that life. Sometimes she saw other children who laughed happily and joked. They really valued communication with each other. And for this reason, the girl really envied them very much. After all, she had never had such a person in her life, and she did not know what it was like to have a real friend. Therefore, when Ascania heard that she would have a real friend in this life, she happily smiled and said that of course she agreed to be friends with this boy. Her cheeks even blushed. She immediately asked her father when she would be able to meet him, because she would like it as soon as possible. The man himself began to smile when he noticed that she liked this idea. He was happy to see that his daughter was happy. But in fact, it was not just a proposal of acquaintance. He thought up a whole plan, and it consisted of getting an invitation to dinner at the house of the Marquis and finally forcing his daughter to eat normally. He also thought that it would be necessary to ask those cooks to prepare a lot of varied and delicious food so that Ascania could not hold back and finally ate as before. After some time, the news reached the Duke's estate, and the boy with whom the girl was supposed to meet was not at all glad that they were supposed to meet. And the next day when Ascania came to his estate and saw her, he was very surprised. He could not believe that she really was such a Tolstoy. The guy didn't even show proper politeness. He saw the Ascania and asked what kind of pig it was. The girl herself was incredibly shocked to hear this. She looked at him in astonishment, not even approaching, and could not believe that this is now her new friend. In fact, some time ago, Scania was riding in a coach with her father and his friend. Her father laughed happily and asked how the man had been feeling lately, because last time he had saved his life after all. The Marquis of the Appleton Ball smiled and thanked him and said that he had been resting recently because he was bored and his friend had come, for which he was grateful to him. After that, the man looked at Ascania and said that she had grown up incredibly and was already a real adult girl. He also said that his son is not very sociable, so he asked her to make friends with him if possible and try to find a common language. The girl said that they could definitely entrust her with this business. She was a professional in this. However, when Ascania came directly to the boy, she realized that this was not going to be easy because he was not just unsociable, he was a real ruffian. The guy, holding a book in his hands, looked at Ascania with disgust and asked her not to bore him because he didn't really want to be friends with such a dog and a fat girl like her. In fact, even then, Ascania had to understand that everything would not be so simple. After all, this Marquis was the last boss and Yuri Appleton's namesake. Yuri Appleton was the messenger of darkness. This nonsense that only strived for power and power. He believed that weak people were not worth anything, therefore he could kill. If he did not like something about a person, he did not consider it something wrong. This man possessed the abilities of darkness, for which he was called the messenger of death. Asking had to spend some time with this boy. But soon they were all gathered in the dining room for dinner. There were many different attractive and very appetizing dishes on the table. So as soon as the girl saw them, she could not contain her admiration. And her father, seeing her facial expression, immediately began to smile. He turned to the girl and asked if it was true that all this looked very delicious. Then Ascania realized that this was all his doing. But she had to restrain herself and not give in to this temptation. However, unfortunately, she could not do this. After she tried the first course, she could not stop and ate absolutely everything that was there. At that moment, Ascania blamed herself very much. She understood that it would definitely be the end because she didn't want anything like this. However, she couldn't. But her father, meanwhile, was very happy because he was still able to achieve his goal and fed his daughter with a joyful smile. He said that he was very happy to see that she had such a good appetite. The very guy with whom Ascania was supposed to befriend looked at her with disgust. He thought that she was like a real pig and could not control herself even in the presence of guests. And from that moment some time passed, and Marquis Appleton already came to them in the palace so that the children could establish normal relations with each other, and it was already the third day after their arrival. During all these days of asking, she had to eat a lot because her father could not let go of her, and all the time gave her various fatty and unhealthy food. Due to the fact that Ascania could not help herself, she blamed herself very much for this, so she began to play sports even more diligently. In the end, that's how her life goes at the beginning. She ate and ran and so on in a circle. However, during this time, the weight of Ascania, who tried to observe her regime, did not decrease even a drop, and this definitely upset her. On the contrary, somehow she even gained a few extra kilograms, but Ascania still did not understand how this all happened. In her past life, she always followed the diet prescribed by doctors, so she was irresistibly attracted to all these delicacies prepared by her father. And because of the diet, she also constantly felt insurmountable hunger. So Ascani did not understand how she could refuse all this when her stomach simply demanded it. And besides, in the presence of other adults, she couldn't even get angry at her father properly and tell him everything she thought about his dishes. But Ascania understood that for the sake of her own future, she had to leave this place as soon as possible because otherwise she will continue to grow fat and nothing will change. But in addition to all this, Ascania also had another serious problem, and it was, of course, Yuri Appleton. She tried with all her might to make friends with him. However, he simply took and ignored the girl. And this was very different from what she saw when she was playing. Suddenly, after a morning run, she decided to try to talk to Yuri again. She saw that he was in the library, and when he picked up a few books, he could barely hold them in his hands. His hands were shaking, he almost dropped the whole stack, and Ascania assumed that something serious might even have happened to him. But she couldn't just blindly continue to endure his indifference to herself, so the girl gathered courage and approached Yuri and was going to have a serious talk with him. She happily smiled and came closer to him and greeted him. However, Yuri didn't even answer her. He just looked at her for a while. And then he returned to reading the book. The girl continued to smile. However, she was furious inside. She couldn't believe that he was going to continue to ignore her and pretend that she didn't exist at all. In fact, no matter what Yuri from the past was, he still remained the same. So she was going to find a completely different approach to this person. She also knew a strategy by which she could fight him. So Ascania approached him and asked if he wanted to fight. In fact, the book the guy was reading was quite interesting. It was called The Secret of the Human Body: How to Kill with Just One Finger. Finally, the guy agreed to fight with her. But Ascania had to seriously prepare before that, so she also decided to spend some time in the library. The girl stood in front of the bookshelves and thought about what basic magic she needed to know to keep the enemy under control. There were various books. For example, one of them was called Strong and Influential People: The Difference Between Heroes and Murderers. Of course, the girl did not know the reason. However, for some reason, the boy read only books about strength and power, as well as how to improve his abilities. Moreover, Ascania did not understand at all what was the point of even buying such books. She thought that everything was not so scary while he was little. However, Yuri was already turning little by little into a monster that craved power. And this meant that at this rate, her dream of making peace during her student years would turn into soap bubbles and simply burst. Of course, at first it was very difficult for her to believe that such a cute boy as Yuri could turn into a monster in the future. However, it was true. That is why Ascania assumed that education from an early age was incredibly important. When the boy still agreed to a duel with her, she led him and eventually laid him on the ground. Ascania was sitting on Yuri's back, and he continued to scream and hit the floor with his hands, saying that she would get off him, and he called her a fat pig and even more horrible names. This made her a little sad. However, then the girl thought that his mother had died, and because of this, she even felt sorry for Yuri for a moment, so she patted him on the head. Yuri's mother was the Marquise of Asta. Initially, she was quite sickly and weak, and after the birth of her son, her condition worsened many times. And 6 months after giving birth, she simply died. The servants said that until her death, Yuri was no different from ordinary children. He was a very polite and smiling boy. He loved his mother, and it was really difficult to believe that a man like Yuri could be a loving boy. However, after her death, the childish smile that should have been with him for a very long time disappeared from his face, and he became the way Ascania saw him. Now the girl assumed that Asta's death might be the reason for the appearance of Yuri's boss. Therefore, in the end, she decided to help him, and with a smile on her face, she turned to the boy and said that, "I will become your older sister." Yuri heard this and became even more angry. He continued to resist and asked what she was saying at all, and he also did not understand why he needed an older sister. Well, Ascania said that she didn't understand why he was asking these questions at all, because he lost to her, and she also wondered if he didn't know that the strongest survives, so now he just had to listen to her. But the guy started to get indignant. He said that he hadn't lost at all, especially since they were fighting and she just took it and pushed him. He thought that it was very unfair on her part to act like that. But the girl continued to insist on her, smiling joyfully. She wondered if this meant that he was not going to give up. She turned him over in order to see his face. Ascania told him not to worry because she wasn't going to beat him more, because he had already had a good time. The guy heard this and was very surprised. He looked at his rival in surprise and did not understand what she was trying to achieve. This girl was clearly a mystery to him. But suddenly, Ascania began to tickle him very sharply. The guy immediately laughed. Of course, he was afraid of tickling. He tried to push her away from himself. However, it did not work for him. He asked her to stop and not do it anymore, but the girl who really enjoyed it said that she would continue, but only if he gave up. Only then would she stop tickling him. But the guy, continuing to laugh, said that he hadn't lost yet, so he wasn't going to give up. Ascania, continuing to tickle him, said that in that case she wasn't going to stop either. He tried to push her away again, but he really couldn't even hold back his laughter from laughing. He even shed tears. It was really a very unusual phenomenon for him. Ascania happily smiled and said that it was much better when he laughed. He didn't frown, but he always walked around with such an expression on his face, as if he had already lived an adult life and had many different problems that he could not cope with. I continued to laugh. Yuri said that she was also still small, so he did not understand why she said such things. But the girl said that she was still older than him. Therefore, it was better for him to give up, since she still had a lot of strength. And after some time, Yuri still couldn't stand it and laughing loudly said that he was giving up. The children continued to laugh for some time. Meanwhile, the maids who were nearby heard this and were very surprised. They could not believe that they heard the laughter of the young master. They haven't had this for a long time because of this. One of the maids even shed a tear because it was really nice to hear that the child is recovering and can laugh like everyone else. They also assumed that, for sure, Yuri was incredibly happy about the appearance of a new girlfriend, and therefore imagined what a happy future awaited the boy. After this tickling, Ascania decided to go out for a walk with herself. She took Yuri. They went to the garden where beautiful blue roses were growing near them. In order to relieve them at least a little of their awkward silence, the girl asked if he would like to go for a ride with laughter again, because they really had a lot of fun together. But the guy looked at her with contempt and wondered why he was doing this at all, because he really didn't understand why she was so attached to him. Then Ascania suddenly tore off one of her lips and looked at him with a smile, and said that he should call her Nuna, and wondered why he was so rude to the older one. But Yuri didn't like this treatment for sure. He wondered why she took it that she could claim the title of a nun. And in general, he didn't know where nuns like her could live. The girl did not react in any way to these insults. She only smiled and told him to make his face simpler because the smile was more flattering to his face. She approached the fountain, which was also located in the garden of the estate, and said that she was very sorry to be in such an incredibly beautiful place with his gloomy face. Ascania looked around and said that there were so many beautiful flowers in this garden, and she was very sorry that because of his gloomy mood, he still could not see their beauty in any way. The guy heard this and was very surprised for a while. He just looked at the girl. I don't understand what she's saying at all. But then he suddenly said that Ascania was the first. Who called these flowers beautiful? Until this moment, everyone considered them strange and not natural. Well, Ascania. I keep laughing. Didn't understand why they were called ugly. After all, they were really beautiful. In fact, quite often, Scania recalled one event in this story, namely the first distortion. It happened when the distortion of magic happened for the first time. This is a story about raging monsters and numerous victims among people. Some people said that as a result of this terrible distortion of magic, the blue rose that the girl was holding in her hands at that moment appeared. Yuri also knew this story. He told it to the girl and explained that it was for this reason that no one liked her, because it is not known when the monster will appear. And Scania continued to look at him without taking her eyes off her. She did not say anything to him about this. However, the boy was very embarrassed for some reason. He turned his gaze away from her and said in a low voice that he could not believe that even after such a terrifying story, she still considered this rose beautiful. The girl replied that she had heard this story before, but she believes that she cannot be believed because it was definitely false information, because it has not been proven to the end. After that, she suddenly laughed and said that she definitely did not want to treat the incredibly beautiful roses that she liked badly because of some words. This made Yuri very angry. He said that everyone just hates them. Despite the fact that his mother planted them, they really wanted to dig up these bushes with all their heart. However, he forbade them to do it. In fact, when Yuri was still in his mother's womb, she was in an incredibly serious condition. It was already too serious, and the doctor put the question to the Duke because he had to make the final decision. The doctor said that he should make a decision as soon as possible about who he is going to save, his wife or child. The man also explained that if he hesitated too long, he risked losing both of them. At that moment, the Duke did not know what to choose. He could not make a decision, because it was too difficult. But fortunately, a miracle happened that no one expected. Marquise, who hugged her child, suddenly told her husband that they needed to plant one beautiful flower in the garden. The woman wanted it to be a blue rose. She wondered what the man thought about it. Of course, the Duke was very surprised by such a proposal. He did not understand why she suddenly decided to ask about it. But the Marquise explained everything clearly to him. She told the man that she and the baby survived miraculously, and it was the blue rose that meant a miracle. She also knew that others would say that it brings misfortune. However, she did not want it to be so. Of course, it was quite strange that in the end, a flower that many considered ominous symbolizes a miracle. And after the Marquise learned about the meaning of this flower, her room began to be decorated with blue roses constantly. Perhaps it is the miracle that emerges from the desire to overcome anxiety and doubt. Thus, blue roses decorated the Appleton estate, and especially their dear garden. Naturally, no one was at all happy with these apologies. After all, everyone knew the history of this flower and therefore was skeptical of such a plant. Everyone knew that the blue rose brings misfortune. Although with Yuri, everyone tries to praise her and admire her beauty, but he sees lies in their words and looks. The boy said that she himself perfectly understands that those around her avoid her, and that is why he had such amazing words about how beautiful she is. Yuri then even did something incredible. He turned to the girl and thanked her for this. It was really important to him that she called these roses beautiful. As soon as she heard this, she was very surprised, because never in all the time that she had tried to establish contact with Yuri, he had never said anything like that. The boy was always closed, and she felt the sincerity in his gratitude. From that moment, a whole month has passed since Ascania arrived at Marcus Appleton's estate, and on the last day she was supposed to be there, the girl ran to meet her new friend. While she was running around the estate, she thought about whether Yuri himself felt sorry for the fact that this was the last day when she was at his place. Of course, she assumed that he would show complete indifference, but she hoped that he was at least a little sad. In this estate, Ascania's diet completely failed, but she was able to buy a lot for herself. At that moment, the girl had already run to Yuri's room and, going inside, she said that she had come to talk. Only when she entered the library where the boy spent most of his time was she very surprised because there was only one maid there. Ascania immediately wondered where Yuri had gone because at this time he always reads books in the library, and suddenly he was not there. The maid nervously laughed and said that if the girl meant the young master, then he was definitely not here because he went to the same place. Ascania was immediately surprised when she heard this and asked what place she was talking about, because she had never heard of special places. But the maid explained that this place was on the hill behind the backyard, where his mother was buried. That is where Yuri was at that moment. When she heard it, she was very surprised and immediately asked the maid why he went there at all, because she really didn't understand. When the maid explained that this day was the birthday of the mistress, and he went there to present flowers to the grave. He took a bouquet of blue roses with him, so the maid assumed that the master wanted to give them to his mother. After all, they were her favorites, so it was much easier for him to cope with everything. Who had already climbed the hill suddenly heard someone's eyes below. He thought that someone had called him, so he stopped for a while to check. However, he was not able to see anyone, so he simply went further, assuming that it just seemed to him. But in fact, in the end, the guy didn't like it because it was Ascania who was running after him in the meantime. As soon as the girl found out where he was headed, she immediately ran away from the estate and began to catch up with him. However, it quickly became incredibly difficult for her to run because her physical form was still in poor condition. She could not even calmly climb the hill with a calm step. She did not understand why this small elevation was like the most real mountain for her. At some point, Ascania even thought that during this time she managed to gain weight and therefore it became even heavier. In fact, before that, the maid told the girl that the hill was not that high, so she could reach it in just a few minutes. Even at that moment, Ascania already understood that it would take her twice as much time, but soon she finally realized that she had to go a little more, because she was almost at the top. Suddenly, when she climbed higher, she saw a carefully assembled bouquet of blue roses. When she saw it, the girl was very scared for Yuri. She assumed that something bad had happened to him. Since the bouquet was lying separately from the boy himself, she ran in that direction to double-check what had happened. As soon as she finally climbed upstairs, Ascania saw that there was a real monster. It was a huge, thin creature with legs like bones, and it also had terrible horns, and it was this monster that was aimed at Yuri. The girl just stood there for a while and looked at all this, Purple blood was dripping from the monster's mouth. It was a truly horrifying sight. But most of all, at that moment, Askania was worried about the question of where in this area could this monster come from. But she also didn't know what to do. She was perfectly aware of the fact that this monster was going to attack Yuri, and therefore she needed to figure out as soon as possible what to do with it in order to help him. It was too dangerous because the boy was in a stressful situation, so he just sat and looked at this creature. He didn't even move at all. Askania understood that she needed to act very quickly and ahead of schedule, so she ran up to the boy and covered him with her body in order to protect Yuri. When she saw the monster, only the thought flashed through her mind that if the monster kills Yuri now, one of the problems that should have arisen in the future will probably disappear. Of course, she thought so. However, her body reacted much faster than her thoughts, and there was a reason for this. In the near future, Yuri was supposed to become the last boss. However, during the month they spent together, he became like a brother to her, and she really began to feel special emotions for this person. He was the brother whom she had always wanted, and in this way, after a short time of transportation and all his dissatisfaction, they still became friends. In fact, Askania was able to cover the boy with her back. However, she received a rather strong blow. She saw that the monster had not gone anywhere, so she turned to him in a low voice and said that he should leave immediately. The girl was really ready to sacrifice her life just to save him, and that meant a lot. At that moment, Yuri had various thoughts in his head. He did not understand how it was possible, and also how she was not afraid. Earlier, he called her a weakling. However, in the end, he realized that it was he who turned out to be a weakling. Usually, weaklings could never do anything and did not know how. But Askania eventually saved his life, and the boy even remembered his mother's words at that moment. Before the woman left this world, she turned to the boy and said, "You must be strong even if I'm not around." Yuri remembered these words forever, because they were the last words of his mother before her death. However, quite often, he also heard the conversations of the maids. Many servants said that if she had not given birth to the mistress, she would not have died for them. It was indeed the most real misfortune, and they could not believe that this was all true. They really believed that it was because of their mistress that their mistress died. But Yuri at that moment was only thinking about how strong he should have been. The point was not at all that he did not understand his mother's words to be strong in spirit, strong in body and soul. He himself understood all this perfectly. It was really very easy for him to train his body, and there were also a lot of people who could teach him this, so it was not a big deal for him. However, he didn't know how a strong soul could do it, no matter how much Yuri didn't read books. In this way, 6 months passed, and then Askania appeared directly in his life and she changed it forever. This girl was weak-willed. He considered her some kind of fat pig. However, it was really clear from her that she was not weak-minded. Therefore, he did not understand how she was able to react in such a way in this situation, how she was able to gather courage and rush to Yuri, knowing that it could be the end. Yuri continued to sit all this time and held the girl in his arms. Meanwhile, the monster had already come to his senses and began to approach them to deliver his second blow. The guy had a lot of different thoughts in his head. He thought only about what Mom told him, as well as what Askania said directly so that he would run away and leave her. For some time, Yuri continued to stay there. He thought that Askania was not weak. On the contrary, she was much stronger than him. The courage to give up one's life not for the sake of oneself, but for the sake of a loved one, was valued very dearly. This was the strength that the boy did not possess. Therefore, smiling joyfully, he turned to Askania and thanked her for this. He said that it was thanks to her that he was finally able to understand what real strength means. This was the question he had been asking himself for a long time. When Yuri pointed his hand in the direction of the monster and hit him incredibly hard, he drove the monster away in this way, and he never returned to their happiness. After such a heroic battle, Yuri turned to the girl and said that apparently everything was fine with her. He did not understand how she was able to fall asleep in such a tense situation. Even after the blow, however, he did not wake her up. He looked at her with admiration and a very joyful smile. In a quiet voice, Yuri said that if it wasn't for Askania, he would have grown up to be a very strange person. Thus, the guy was really happy that she appeared in his life, because she radically changed his thinking in just a short amount of time that they had known each other. When Yuri had to be alone in front of the monster, he cursed himself and his weakness. It was all because of his inner weakness. The whole time the guy couldn't move, he just sat and looked at the monster, thinking that if he were stronger, he would have killed this creature with just one blow. In the end, he came to the realization that he cursed himself because he hated his own weakness. It was an insane obsession with power that took over his entire mind. And the only thing that helped him get out of this state in time was Ascania. He began to admit that she was stronger than him, and therefore he thanked her again for saving him. In the end, Yuri still called her nun because he understood that even though he considered her to be a completely different person, she turned out to be not such a person. From that moment, a few hours of prayer passed. Together with their father, they had to return to the estate. So Yuri and his father went out to say goodbye to them. Yuri even started to smile. He waved at the girl and called her that way. He said goodbye to Ascani. But as soon as she heard how exactly he called her, she was a little surprised. He wondered why he suddenly started calling her Nuna. But the guy didn't want to answer that. He ignored her questions and thought that it was really nice for him to look at her smile. After that, she turned around and started walking towards the exit. However, Yuriev, suddenly a little embarrassed, nevertheless gathered the courage to ask her one question. I continue to call her nun. He was interested in what kind of ideal man the girl had. Hearing this, Ascania was very surprised. She immediately thought about what her ideal really was, because she had never seriously thought about it. But in the end, Ascania thought that a man should have muscles. He should be powerful and very strong, and muscles should radiate health. The girl voiced something completely different. She answered that she liked kind, smiling, and polite men. Then Yuri smiled happily and immediately said that he would definitely become like that for her. She still did not decide to agree with him and wished him luck after that. They finally went back to the estate. In fact, there was a so-called magical disease in that world. It was a disease of growth that appeared in this world before the age of 13. Usually she ended up feeling ill in bed for a whole week. This happened just before meeting Yuri when Ascania was 11 years old. And this was considered a rather early development for her. For more than 2 hours, she had this magical disease in the same way as those who possessed the abilities of those who were called geniuses. And when this pain finally ended, the girl became the most real Ascania. Therefore, as soon as they returned to the palace, the next day the girl decided to talk to her father. And when she came to him, she immediately declared that she had recently awakened Mana. Father heard this and was so amazed that he even spilled the tea he was drinking on his expensive shirt. For some time he looked at her in amazement, then suddenly wondered if it was really true and she was not deceiving him. Ascania smiled happily and said that it was so. However, as far as she knew, it passed without heat, which was natural in awakening. The girl said that it ended quite quickly. After about 3 hours, she was definitely alone and did not know. However, she was very happy when she was finally allowed to go. The father then picked her up in his arms and began to circle with her. He began to praise her and said that he was incredibly proud of his beloved daughter. In fact, since Ascania knew very well that this was now her reality and not just a game, she had to be careful. In this world, there were now monsters and dangerous magical power. She did not want to tell anyone about the magical disease in order to live an ordinary life. However, after thinking for a while, she came to the conclusion that it would be very good for her to learn magic in advance. It also applied to Yuri, and also to the dream, as he called it. Ascania thought that if it was a real monster, then terrible things could happen to her and Yuri, so she thought that she should control it. The father finally put the girl on the ground and offered to check what kind of mana she had. He handed her a crystal layer that could help them in this. He told her to put her hands on it, and then he would do everything himself. That's when the Ascania began to touch this layer. Its color immediately became green. Her father saw this and immediately began to burst into tears in his eyes. Even tears came back. He said that his beloved daughter has the property of strengthening. After this conversation took place, Dasha's father found a teacher for the girl who was supposed to train and improve her abilities in magic. The man, who was Burton Schumann, bowed and thanked him for being invited at all. After that, he saw Ascania and wondered if she really was the same little child with magic power at such and such an age. But the girl herself, seeing this man, could not take her away just by looking at him. Burton introduced himself and said that from this day, he would be her teacher. So he was very happy to meet her. In fact, Burton was the girl's favorite character. She thought that since he will now be her teacher, she is incredibly lucky because she will often cross paths with him. Ascania even blushed a little from embarrassment. She turned to the teacher and said that she too would be incredibly pleased to meet him. Her eyes literally lit up with happiness, and the girl asked when they were supposed to start their classes because she couldn't wait. The men happily smiled and said that he was very glad that she was determined. However, before they started the classes, they also had to do one more very important thing. She was a little surprised when she heard about this. She didn't understand what kind of thing the man was talking about. Meanwhile, he sat down in front of her and began to examine her with a careful look. She thought about what it could be and suggested that perhaps in this world it is customary to arrange welcome dinners, and that is exactly what he hinted at. However, Burton only carefully examined her and began to name her data. He named her weight and said that when she was growing it was very excessive weight and it was bad. He also said that he had heard from the Duke that she had outstanding powers of strengthening. However, physically, her body definitely did not keep up with her abilities. For this reason, he said that they will start with a diet in order to improve it and physical abilities so that everything is done according to the rules. Burton also said that he had heard that she could not control her appetite. However, looking at the conditions that they had in the estate, he could see that they were quite unsuitable for leading such a healthy lifestyle, so it was quite obvious. However, he told her not to worry. After all, if she learns well from him, it will be difficult only at first. With time, she will get used to such a schedule and everything will be very easy. After she has completely mastered the magic of strengthening, most of her calories will turn into mana, and the rest can be used to maintain vital activity. Ascania heard all this and could not believe that it was really true. She asked what exactly it meant in order to make sure for sure. Burton replied that this meant that she would be able to eat as much as she wanted and not even get fat. The enhancement magic didn't just make her body strong, it could make her body just perfect. The girl then immediately screamed loudly and said that she couldn't wait to start learning in that case, because this was really just an ideal ability for her. The man smiled joyfully and said that it is very good that she had so much enthusiasm. However, the process will really be painful for her. Therefore, he decided to warn her about it in advance. He also said that she would have to go through the painful destruction and restoration of her muscles in this way. And the most terrible training of asking began. In addition to the fact that she had rather long, grueling runs, the coach forced her to climb mountains and peaks for a while. He also talked about how Scania would push up as many times as possible, and in the end, after one such workout, the girl would have to sit out the rest of the day. During the break between exercises, the man gave her some purple liquid. He told her to drink it all and not to spit it out under any circumstances. Ascania immediately smiled and thanked him for this. She thought that he really cared about her condition, and therefore gave her a drink of water. It was really a little easier for her after that. Burton said that next time she will drink this liquid 4 times a day instead of food, so she will absorb the necessary amount of calories for her functioning. The girl did not object to anything. She only thought about how she would be able to endure doing this all day long. Burton, who finally gave her a little rest, thought that she was not at all like the others who immediately ran away. So he sincerely wanted to help her reveal her abilities as much as possible. And he wanted to make her the best girl in the country, even the strongest girl in history, and a month has passed since that moment. These intensive trainings were really exhausting, but they gave results, and in the end, after a month, Ascania was able to push up 200 times. Burton heard that she managed to do it in just a few minutes, said that she was a big well done and that the training could be finished with that. And with such a crazy regime, Ascania turned into a real beauty. She had a very slim and toned body, which she dreamed of. She was very happy that in this month she was able to lose an incredible amount of weight. And now she liked her reflection in the mirror even more. And knowing that the risk of diseases had decreased fueled her interest. In the end, she was no longer intimidated by these classes. She became really healthy and could physically withstand a large amount of stress. And after this month, Yuri and his father once went to visit the girl. Because all this time, they did not see each other at all and did not cross paths. Yuri's father noticed that he looked very pleased and asked what had caused it. The boy started to smile almost all the time and said that he was happy, but because he was finally going to meet his nun. When his father also smiled and said that he would really be very surprised when they arrived, but Yuri already knew that the girl had changed a little and said that he would like to see her in a new way as soon as possible. Also, the boy picked blue roses for her in advance and really hoped that she would like this bouquet. Because of this, he was still a little worried. At the same time, Ascania was at her training. However, now they were much more complicated because Burton was sitting on top of the girl and she had to do push-ups, taking into account all his weight so she couldn't do it quickly. At the same time, the man constantly shouted at her and said that the speed of her push-ups had slowed down, so he threatened her that he would add even more weight if she did not return to the old one. Ascania only thought that if everything continued at such a pace, she would definitely die soon. The man himself was amazed because he did not expect that she could withstand even this kind of training. Burton believed that she would give up in the first minute. However, she continued so much that she was very surprised by him. In fact, Barda did not use his magic. It consisted in the fact that he could strengthen the body, So instead of 120 kilograms, he now weighed more than 700. The man did not understand how she could withstand all this, because even for him, it would be very difficult to do it. But Ascania did not give up. She continued to push up and prove that she was much stronger than he thought. At the same time, the girl could no longer withstand all of this. Therefore, she fell to the ground. The man just noticed this and said that water does not flow under the lying stone. Therefore, she had to keep trying. However, at that very moment, Yuri had already arrived on the territory. He saw all this and was very shocked. The boy did not understand what this man had done to him. He was so angry that even evil energy emanated from him. The man turned to Burton and asked in an angry voice what he had done with the girl. The teacher turned around and saw that some shadows were approaching him. He managed to turn away from them in time and, turning to the boy, told him to calm down because it was just a misunderstanding. He wanted to explain to Yura that this was a lesson that was planned in advance. However, he did not have time because these shadows began to spread and surround him. He immediately understood that this was dark magic, so he assumed that this guy was the son of Duke Marcus Appleton. After all, it was their family that possessed a similar type of magic. However, he still could not understand why this guy threw such spells at him, because he had done absolutely nothing. And then Burton suddenly remembered that he was addressing a girl, so he asked the guy to stop and ask if it was true that he was Yuri. Also, he said that Ascania had already talked about him more than once. The boy suddenly heard this and immediately straightened his cheeks. His cheeks were covered with a blush, and he became embarrassed and asked if she was really talking about him. The teacher immediately said that this was indeed true. They talked quite often after the lessons, and he himself at that moment realized that this boy really liked Ascania, because if it were not so, he would have reacted completely differently. Then, Yuri asked who the girl's man was. Burton then asked him to allow him to introduce himself. The man gave his name and said that he was her teacher. Then he again asked if it was true that she was talking about Yuria, and just after this question, Burton was convinced that he really liked Ascania, because in fact she never told anyone about him. But Burton has always been quite a self-confident person, so he told Yura that it was clear from his face that he was very curious about what they were talking about and what kind of lessons he was teaching, as well as what exactly she thought about him. Of course, the boy didn't like them and he got angry again. At the same time, Burton noticed that it is very easy to mislead boys in love if the tongue is well hung. And he was just a professional in conversations. Therefore, he told Yuri that he could tell him, but only if he wanted it. The boy again asked if it was true, and he would really tell him. Meanwhile, they began to move away from Ascania, who at that time was unconscious. He began to tell various fables, and he mentally asked the girl for forgiveness because he simply had to do it in order to save himself. They were sitting not far from Ascania, and Burton said that she was bragging that she has a very cute younger brother, a kind, good little angel. Yuri suddenly became a little sad. He said in a serious voice that it is really true. He is her only and very weak brother. Burton then immediately said that he forgot to tell him one more thing, because Ascania said that she believed that he would grow up incredibly courageous and strong. He said that this was a so-called prediction for him from an ascension. And as soon as Yuri heard it, hope settled in his soul. He really wanted to believe this strange man. Burton continued to invent. He said that of course she sees a brother in you and therefore speaks so freely about how cute you are. The man even dared to express his assumption that she simply had not yet admitted that she liked him, and Yuri heard these words then blushed even more. He definitely could not believe that she could really say such a thing. But then the guy suddenly asked the man why he was pressuring her in his lessons, because he completely started talking about another topic and forgot that he wanted to ask about it. But the man explained that there was simply no other way without grueling training. She will never learn to master magic and strengthening, so these were forced measures. Burton also explained that the property of her magical gift is such that it leads to a serious illness, and the insidiousness of this illness is that the person is apparently completely healthy. And besides, even without magical abilities, she had problems with her weight. For this reason, these training sessions were incredibly necessary. Yuri then stuttered and said that he was sure that everything would work out for her. After all, she is incredibly strong in spirit. The man happily smiled and said that of course this is how she overcomes difficulties for the sake of her health. However, he warned the boy to remember that everything he told him was a secret, and he should not say a single word about this conversation. Yuri heard this and wondered why he couldn't speak. Then Barton explained that if he told her, she would be embarrassed to talk to him about Yuri, and he wouldn't be able to find out anything more. And besides, if she doesn't have someone to talk about Yuri with, her interest in him will decrease. And that's why he had to keep this conversation a secret if he didn't want that to happen. Yuri immediately shouted loudly and said that he absolutely did not want this to happen. Meanwhile, Burton thought about how to convince the children. It's increasingly difficult lately because they grow up so quickly. But in fact, Burton, speaking all this lie, did not even suspect that in the end, this conversation could turn Yuri's interest in Ascania into real love. And from that moment, several months passed, or rather quickly, and autumn-November came. All the trees around turned yellow and were incredibly beautiful. And Ascania was also incredibly happy at this time of the year, because it meant that during this time she was finally able to return to normal. She now had a completely adequate weight for her height and age. She didn't have to worry about anything anymore. She finally looked the way she wanted. And despite the intensive muscle training, she unfortunately didn't gain weight. But even despite this, Ascania felt in good shape. She really had a lot of strength and energy, and this gave her even more motivation for new training. In the absence of musculature, her physical strength nevertheless became truly titanic. And she thought that her lessons with the teacher would end very soon. And because of this, she was truly sorry. However, she did not become upset for a long time due to the fact that very soon she will stop seeing Burton. After all, with this image, she will be able to avoid her sad fate. Despite the fact that Ascania did not train as much as it was necessary, but she was very strong, and after the attack during training, her clothes were not even damaged in any way. And Yuri, who looked at her with incredible admiration in his eyes, as the plot of the game said, was proud of the fact that already 4 months ago he had discovered his magical abilities. This guy really was a real genius. Once when they met each other, he showed her various tricks, and Ascania sincerely praised him. She said that he was a good man, because not everyone could do that. In the end, Yuri turned out to be much stronger than his peers. However, compared to the power that she will have in the future when she becomes the boss, it was really nothing. Therefore, Ascania assumed that he would be just a very nice boy for quite a long time. However, she did not really know something about Yuri, and she did not know the fact that Yuri was not the innocent and kind boy she saw him as. He simply pretended to be a cutie in front of them while examining Burton's advice. Even then, when they first met, the teacher told him to show her his skills in magic because it could become his so-called weapon. The boy was a little surprised and wondered if this meant that he had to show her his strength, but Burton explained that this was not the case at all. He believed that it could become a hindrance to him. He said that if you show strength, it will not be connected with your appearance, so appeal to her maternal instinct with the help of a cute and harmless image. At first, Yuri did not really understand what he was talking about. Barton explained that when he grows up enough to be taller than the girl, then he can finally start showing her how strong he was in the end. He also said that this will be a very unexpected discovery for her, and she will begin to look at him not as a younger brother, but as a real man, and soon she will have real feelings for him. Of course, at first Yuri did not like this idea at all. He thought that everything was complicated. Burton explained that it was best for Yuri to accept the position of a sweet and harmless boy so that Ascania would continue to protect him, so that their bond would become much stronger. And when Yuri came to visit Ascania again, she was sitting near the mirror. The boy looked at her in surprise and asked what she was doing, pretending that he didn't know. Of course, his girlfriend was a little surprised at such a strange question. However, she answered with a smile on her face that she looked in the mirror. But Yuri then decided to play the really cute role of a little brother. I smile stupidly. He asked why she had a mirror in the first place because she was incredibly beautiful even without it. And from the horse, meanwhile, she approached him smiling and hugged him tightly, saying that he was incredibly cute. After that, she said that during all this time she had lost quite a lot of weight. And she wondered if she was now beautiful. Even despite his rather young age, Yuri gave her good compliments. He said that she would be beautiful even if she just gained weight. She was perfect in any shape of her body. Ascania was very upset when she heard this, and with a smile on her face asked if he really thought so. But Yuri answered that it was definitely so, because she was always beautiful and like a flower. Of course, as soon as she heard this, she was a little surprised and even embarrassed, because she did not think that she could hear such words from the former god of darkness. But even in spite of all her changes, Ascania, I noticed that her eyes just didn't change. She assumed that this was her brand of a boss thief, because her eyes were like those of a demon, and it really annoyed her.